Breaking news. USA Rugby has been sued by Douglas Schoninger, proprietor of Pro Rugby USA, also known as North American Rugby LLC, which is a Delaware corporation doing business in the state of New York. And three states with 5 teams. 3 teams were in California, 1 team was in Colorado, and 1 team was in the state of Ohio. The named plaintiffs in this suit are as follows. United States of America Rugby Football Union, which is a Delaware incorporated nonprofit corporation doing business in the state of Colorado. Rugby International Marketing, a Delaware limited liability company doing business in the state of Colorado. Named individuals: former board chairman Will Chang, former board member and former RIM board chairman Chad Keck, former USA Rugby CEO and interim RIM CEO Nigel Melville, and former USA Rugby CEO Dan Payne, now America's Rugby CEO. The plaintiffs are North American Rugby LLC, doing business as Pro Rugby Organization, and Douglas Schoninger. This complaint was filed in Boulder County Court on the 5th of June, 2018. So that is yesterday on the record. There's a lot of stuff in this. Matt McCarthy was able to get part of the complaint and put it on his website, rugbywrapup.com. It is the top story right now. It has been reposted on Earful of Dirt, on my Twitter at the Strobro, and at earfulofdirt.com. So check that out. This is pretty crazy. If you read through this, I got to say, some of these things sort of ring true when you think about it in the dealings of the USA Rugby, especially under Melville, Chang, and Chad Keck during that period of time. We've always tended to have issues with partners. The interesting part is that he alleges that Chang, Keck, and Mike Donovan, the mayor of Glendale, also part owner of the Glendale Raptors, conspired to basically take his league away from him as soon as he was able to, and this is in his filing, as soon as he was able to demonstrate that there was commercial viability, they intended to seize the league from him and create their own. I'll point out that he mentions Major League Rugby in here, and that Nigel Melville was talking to him about Major League Rugby when they were negotiating his sanctioning agreement. But the previous league that was under sanction for 15-a-side was called North American Professional Rugby, a.k.a. NAPR. And that had Mike Donovan as the mayor of Glendale acting as agency, with Chang, who is going to be the primary backer of a team in the San Francisco, San Jose markets. And then, from what I understand, there was going to be a team in Houston and a team in Vancouver. So it was going to be a cross-border league before Pro Rugby came about. If you look at that league and what was done, they ran through several business models and decided that the time wasn't right and that the models were not going to work. And they were just going to give up, which is what they did, which is why the sanctioning agreement was signed and just, not being done. Was Major League Rugby going to step in? I don't know whether it was going to show up when the sanctioning agreement for Pro Rugby ended, or if they were going to try and be a semi-pro league under Pro Rugby. Because he talks about in the sanctioning negotiations with Dan Payne, when Dan Payne became CEO, that there were provisions for a semi-pro competition. So you would have players basically making match fees, right? And so that would serve more or less as a feeder competition, which I guess you could say was Major League Rugby, but Major League Rugby was very secretive in their planning with all of this at the time when, he still had a sanctioning agreement. Major League Rugby did not become public with this until February of 2017, which was around 2 months after Doug had canceled the league. So I guess there were obviously strategic planning meetings going on for them for what they wanted to do. However, there were legal things in the way. I don't think they were going to start a league if Doug had come back and launched season 2. That's what I don't think, because he had the exclusive sanctioning agreement in place. He alleges that USA Rugby violated the exclusive sanctioning agreement, as well as World Rugby violated the exclusive sanctioning agreement granted to him by USA Rugby and World Rugby sort of entertaining the thought and just having a discussion with the Pro 12. If anyone's really well versed in the Pro 12, how do you say it? Flirtations with American rugby, you would understand that Super and Pro 12 have basically hanging out in the American market saying, hey, we might want to expand to the United States for about 5 to 6 years. So half a decade, they've been flirting with us, saying they're going to come and never come. So if you pay attention to Martin and Nai's comments, and then the fact that they just expanded to South Africa, I don't think they were ever serious about coming to the United States, even though two partners, both first in New York and then down in Washington, D.C., were attempting to negotiate and get them into the States. There were honest brokers with money in the United States that were trying to bring professional teams to the United States after the fact that pro rugby had failed. Well, guess what? They expanded to South Africa and they didn't come here, and now we have Major League Rugby. I'll point out that Mayor Donovan is a backer of Glendale Raptors, but he has not been involved with Chad Keck or Will Chang for several years. And Will Chang and Chad Keck are not involved in Major League Rugby at all. In fact, I don't think, the league as it currently is set up wants to deal with those former board members as business partners at all. He alleges a lot of things in here. If we look at it, he said, there are some interesting comments in here. The rugby community was ecstatic that a domestic American Professional Rugby League had finally come to the fruition. A prominent rugby journalist named Matt McCarthy was interviewing Schoninger and reached across the table to touch Schoninger's arm and stating, Doug, I just want to make sure you're real because you're like Sasquatch to most American rugby fans. That's interesting. So if you think about Sasquatch and Bigfoot, Bigfoot is sort of feared, but also considered an oddity that people are still chasing. Just to think about. And then, Claim 81, and if you've read the sanctioning agreement, you'll know that RIM was supposed to act as a marketing agency and do a bunch of stuff for them as in a non-exclusive manner. But if you talk to some of the people, RIM was never really contacted to do this. But here's the fun part. So in 2015, if you look at the financials, we were getting about $2 million in sponsorship when this thing was signed. They did not launch a league until 2016. So RIM had just started and was moving forward. Line 81, USAR and Melville's promised $4 million in sponsorship never materialized. Schoninger received no more than $100,000 in sponsorship from those sources. Schoninger spent his own money to fill in the difference, resulting in the league costing him personally $6 million in the first year instead of the budgeted $2 million plus the expected sponsorships. I mean, I guess Will Chang and Nigel Melville are the kind of people that would probably promise double what USAR is receiving in sponsorship, because former chairman Will Chang had said that RIM was worth $20 to $30 million. And as you know, it is currently basically hanging on by a thread, and it has caused the USA Rugby Football Union to seek a bailout from World Rugby. Continues to talk in here about his negotiations with Dan Payne, and it's just a doozy. Like I said, some of this stuff definitely rings true, and then some of these complaint lines are just very wrong and categorically incorrect. Like he says that Nigel Melville leaves USA Rugby to join the RFU in their chief executive role. Nigel Melville is not the chief executive, nor was he ever offered or considered to be the chief executive for the RFU. He is the chief of, I think it's performance. So he's like the director of rugby. He's like the boss of Eddie Jones. Okay. And the RFU's representative towards shaping and controlling the professional game, which is the Aviva Premiership and the RFU Championship. To be honest, I read this, and it just really reads as a pretty crazy conspiracy theory. I think his lawyers are right on the money with some things, but that really doesn't forgive the fact that while the season was still going, he stopped paying people. He stopped paying vendors. He stopped paying city departments. He stopped paying players. He stopped paying coaches. That's a World Rugby regulation in violation right there, which is number 4. World Rugby Reg 4. Look it up. It means that you have to pay all your contracts. And then he alleges that USA Rugby stepped in between him and the South African Rugby Union from him purchasing the EP Kings. So I don't know if any of that's correct. No clue. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that goes on in discovery. I know that many people in the rugby media at the time when this was happening were like, and probably including myself, were like, this guy just swindled the American rugby community, right? That was what we said. There's no way you could let him buy the Southern Kings. Well, he ended up not being able to buy the Southern Kings because part of it is that Super Rugby isn't set up to where people own franchises, really. It's not like the Aviva Premiership, and it's not like the top 14. Where individuals own teams. Like Super Rugby is a fully union-owned competition. If you look at how the New Zealand teams are set up, you have private investors owning 50%, but the controlling interest of 50% is owned by the New Zealand Rugby Union because everything's geared towards the national team. Well, provinces in South Africa own the unions that run the Super Rugby and now Pro 14 teams. So I think there's just things that were just in the way. But the news of what had occurred was out there. So you can Google and you can see the articles from that time period. And then he alleges that, USA Rugby started promoting an unsanctioned league in January, of this year, which they did not promote MLR. For the most part, this sanctioning agreement basically said you couldn't talk to Major League Rugby, right? When USA Rugby first issued the press release with the ARC squad, it said who the teams were. Yes, I understand that. So that's what he's saying, promoted Major League Rugby. they did not start promoting anything to do with Major League Rugby in reality. Like, hey, blah, 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 this. Until April, the last week of April, when they started doing their media polls. So there's been a lot of tiptoeing when it came to this sanctioning agreement. Major League Rugby's first game for the regular season, which he alleges was on the 20th, was not. The game that was on the 20th of April was a preseason matchup between the Alberta Prairie Wolfpack and the Utah Warriors. That was a preseason fixture. The first regular season fixture took place on the Saturday, the next day, the 21st of April, the same day his sanctioning agreement had expired, and he'd been informed that his sanctioning agreement would be voided on the 21st of April. The previous, I think it was October. So all kinds of crazy stuff going on with this. At earfulofdirt.com, we have a reporter in Colorado that we will send to this thing when it goes down in August. So look for more reporting from The Hook and from Earful of Dirt. Again, I will link down below the filing in part, because I don't have the complete filing. Rugby Wrap-Up did not put the entire thing in there. I think over time they will release the other parts. I've submitted a public records request for the filing, so when I get that, I will put that on a Dropbox so that everyone can read it, and I'll let you know. So I'm Aaron Castro for The Hook, episode 46. Catch me on episode 47 tomorrow to discuss MLR news and notes.